Hello and welcome to Property Matters on Dublin South FM. As regular listeners might know, Property Matters actually took a break for August, and instead of our usual show, we travelled along the West Coast to meet and interview some of Ireland's Proptech founders and investors. You can catch up on that summer special series on iPropertyRadio.com. As always, you can contact us on Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn at iPropertyRadio or email hello@iPropertyRadio.com. Your host for today is myself, Carol Tallon, and I'm delighted to be joined remotely by CEO of IPAV and regular guest of the show, Pat Davitt. Pat, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Carol. How are you? I hope
Good.
well.
Good. Pat, it's been a couple of months since we spoke, and obviously since the first week of June, your members are pretty much back up and running. So I suppose before we get into the report that IPAV has recently published, let's start by just seeing how are your members faring since I suppose their businesses reopened to the public in June.
Yeah, it was obviously most of the offices were locked up for 12 to 13 weeks, and putting the protocol together with both the Property Services Regulator and the SESI was a huge help to get us back up and running, and got us back up and running good and early as well, which is very good because we put a lot of work in behind the scenes into the protocol when probably not a lot of people were working on a protocol. So that we got in and got the Department of Housing on board, and we didn't get in the first let off of the first opening of the housing of the offices, but we did with the second one. So we've been up and running now for about a little bit over 2 months, and it's very, I suppose, very strange for most people because while offices are open and people are still in and out, but the social distancing in the offices is a huge matter, I'd say, for a lot of people, and the safety of their employees, I think, is of premier importance to them, and keeping them safe on an ongoing basis. I think a lot of people thought in the beginning, that it was going to be simple and go back to work and everything would be okay. But when you have staff and you have them mixing and doing appointments and looking at properties for sale and thinking of sellings and everything like that, there's a risk every day with employees, and employers are very, very much aware of that. So that the protocol that we've built, even though we've changed it slightly since we actually put it together, only in the past 3 or 4 weeks we've changed it, but we only changed that around about viewings to make viewings a little bit more simple to do and a little bit better to do. But other than that, the protocol has been working good. And there aren't any reports of COVID in any of the offices, which is great, so it's all working quite well, I think.
That's great. Pat, I actually wasn't aware that there was a change to the protocols in recent weeks in terms of viewings. So what changes were implemented?
Up to about 4 weeks ago, children of under 16 years of age, we weren't allowing them into houses. So we changed that, and we have no age limit there now for children. So if we found that a lot of people wanted to bring their children, some children obviously make decisions on housing, and it's important to have them there that they can see the house. But also some parents are not able, like maybe they can't get somebody to mind their child or whatever the case may be, and they have to come to a viewing with them. And if they can't bring the child into the house, well, then they have to leave with somebody else, and they don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. So that we changed the protocol around about to do that, to facilitate it. And we also changed it to facilitate if somebody comes to view a property and they want to bring their parents or their parents-in-law or something with them, that we will allow 4 people now to view the property at one time with an auctioneer as opposed to 2 before. So it leaves things a little bit better and a little bit easier for agents to view properties. And I think for people coming to view them as well, I think it leaves things a little bit better and easier as well.
Okay, that's a great development. And, one of the things I've commented on it before over the past 2 months, but actually there's been a tremendous effort by estate agencies up and down the country to really make this work for both buyers and sellers. And that's taken a huge amount of effort. In fact, only in the last 4 weeks, I've been out on the road myself back actually calling into estate agencies that we would work with, say, on a digital transformation side of things. And, it really, what we've seen is that this almost feels like an extension changes that were already very much happening and almost being enforced on estate agencies and auctioneering practices all around the country. There was already huge change happening in terms of adapting to change in consumer demands and adapting to how buyers and sellers want to consume property. There had already been so many changes in terms of taking much of the practices online that realistically, I think that firms were much more ready for this than they might have been if this had struck 4 years ago. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it's a very fair assessment, and I suppose the online is one thing, and that definitely has been improvement. A lot of agents would have properties and videos online and visual viewings that you can do on the property. And I think that's one side of it. There's no doubt about that. But still, a lot of people are still coming to estate agents' offices. A lot of people still want to view, and the whole sort of process of agents having to go around in houses after a viewing and cleaning all the taps and the kitchen tops and the door handles and that before another person comes to view, or refusing people to view a property that haven't been in Ireland for 14 days or that have had COVID and aren't isolating properly. It's a whole new thing for agents, but unfortunately they have to do that, and they have to do it. I think they see themselves now. In the beginning, I think maybe agents didn't see that, but I think they see it now themselves, that they have to protect themselves and their staff, and also people that come into view. They have a responsibility there to protect them as well.
Of course,
a lot of the software and all that that's there for auctions online, and the bidding process, and especially the bidding process. Like, there's been a huge change in marts and the selling of cattle, even the selling of cars and the selling of fine arts and everything. There's been huge changes there, which has been brought about by COVID, but which now has been taken on board by the agents. And a lot of them are working very well with it and find it's very, very good, and find that they can still do business. It's amazing what you can do when you have to do it, and you have to keep your business open. It's amazing what you can do.
Yeah, look, survival seems to be kind of hot-wired into the property industry. I think that, when we talk about the recovery from the crash a decade ago, I think that sometimes there's a lack of appreciation that, the recovery really hadn't happened nationwide. So in fact, there was still areas and parts of the country that were playing catch up, that never recovered to the same extent, and that have been under pressure almost consistently for the past 10 or 12 years. And when the in-person element of the business was shut down there for almost 2 months, we saw predictions like from KBC Bank saying that there could be a price drop of as much as 20%, and that was terrifying, because we know that for many agencies they were just about holding on before this, and they just wouldn't have been in a position. Resilience is one thing, but there are some harsh market realities that just don't allow a low margin business, which a state agency is, to take this kind of a hit. And yet everything we're seeing over the past 6 weeks is saying that actually all of those predictions really, they weren't the reality that we saw. And I think you summed it up really well in a quote you gave to the Sunday Independent this weekend. You said all the things that people thought would happen in lockdown didn't happen. And I thought that's it in a nutshell. So I suppose, can you actually talk us through the report that IPAV has just published, because it's a really interesting one in terms of getting a gauge on the market in urban and rural areas?
Yeah, I suppose the what people were talking about and the decrease and everything like that, I'd say a lot of people felt that because COVID and because offices were closed that this was going to happen. But we knew from behind the scenes what was actually happening, that people wanted to go back viewing properties, that they were only waiting to do it. And one of the first webinars that I did, which was before the end of March, I said, when we all get back to work, there's going to be a pent-up demand for properties because of the fact that people haven't been viewing. And that was exactly it. But a lot of people were talking about prices that didn't actually know what was happening behind the scenes and didn't appreciate what was happening behind the scenes. There was no reason for the property prices to fall, because properties are still scarce. They're in short supply. Interest rates are still very low. so that and there are plenty of buyers out there and not afraid to buy properties and wanting to buy properties, and now even more so wanting to buy properties, because again, in the report today in the Independent, what I've said, and one of the big things that we have found is that Irish people now are finding Ireland a safe place to buy a property, a second home if they want, or a safe place to buy a property. And European buyers that are coming back that may or may not have some Irish allegiance or some Irish heritage are now looking at Ireland as being a very safe place to buy a property. So people that were spending their money in Spain and in Portugal, and the great thing, one of the big things was flying to get there, and it was all a big sort of a thrill and everything like that. Now there's so much of a hassle in flying, even in driving from A to B now. But with driving or with flying now, there's so many problems and so much danger of maybe getting some sort of a disease or something from it, that people are finding that, look, we have this in our backyard. So if we want to get out of the city of Dublin or Limerick, or we want to get out of Mullingar, we want to go to Dublin, we want to go for a weekend or whatever, it's much better to buy a property at home and have it, the laws, the rules, the regulations and all that. But moving on to the report is done on the basis of we use the same amount of people, 111 people we use for the report right throughout the country, and we use the same people all of the time for this report since we've launched it about 4 years ago. So we launch it every 6 months. It's the IPAV Property Price Barometer, and we do it in three types of property, which is a 3-bedroom semi, a 4-bedroom semi, and a 2-bedroom apartment. And then, apart from looking at the three property prices together, we look at the three of them cumulatively, and then we also look at the price per square metre of all of those properties, so that it gives people, it doesn't go through the whole of the property types in Ireland, but it gives people a huge flair for properties, because most people speak about property, and when they speak about property price, they speak about a 3-bedroom semi. So a 3-bedroom semi, there's one in every town or every village, every city in Ireland. So it's easy to compare the prices from one place to another with them.
Okay.
So we found that prices generally have been very resilient and have held up exceptionally well. There are some areas where they have held up a lot better than others. Some areas that have got huge increases, and, well, I should say huge increases, quite large increases, and some areas that have had some small falls, but not an awful lot. I think there is about 60% more areas with increases than there are with decreases. But overall, with those three types of properties in the first 6 months of the year, we estimate that the property prices have fallen by approximately 0.7%. Now, I know somebody would look at this and say 0.7%. How in the name of God would you work out 0.7%? But when we put all the figures together at the back end, P-Tools, which is a recognisable company which put the barometer together for us, they put all the figures together and obviously come up with this. And while it's a figure, that's all it is, because you couldn't really price a property on the basis of a decrease of 0.7%. But some of the bigger areas, I suppose, are the bigger price increases, and I suppose I'll go through them first, because auctioneers love to hear price increases. But some of the bigger ones are where I live myself in Westmeath. Prices there are up 5.17% on 3-bedroom semis. In Monaghan, which again, a lot of country properties have been up, and up considerably.
That's an interesting one, because it's following the trends that we saw in the UK almost exactly. Yeah.
Like the one where the County Cork is up, but actually the city of Cork is up very slightly. Like, it's only up 0.5%, where the County of Cork is up nearly 6%. So that again, it's county regions. But if you take Cork in particular, if you take West Cork and you take properties there, if our barometer was looking at prices of property in West Cork, or with water views or water areas, any of those type of areas, I'd say the property prices could be up by 10 and 15% in some of those areas. They're up hugely, because you just can't buy a property there at the moment, between Irish people, between foreigners coming there. It's practically impossible to buy properties, and auctioneers are exceptionally busy in those areas.
And the supply, though, is a really big issue, because what we know is that a number of vendors who might have been considering putting their home on the market didn't, or have put their home, if it was on the market, they put matters on hold for a while. So in terms of second-hand properties, we know there's a delay in stock coming to the market, but also in terms of new homes, we know that there's a knock-on effect as a result of the construction shutdown, and all of the reports, which again we hope are going to prove to be overly pessimistic, but all of the reports are showing that the likely loss in productivity as a result of the shutdown and as a result of implementing COVID-19 safety measures on site, we could be looking at a loss of productivity for the construction house building sector of anywhere between 33 and 40%, which is huge. And we already know that there's no way that even the targets set under Rebuilding Ireland are going to be met in terms of new homes delivery. So I suppose, what are your members doing? Because I would imagine, from speaking to estate agents around the country, what they're telling me is that they're selling properties faster. They're selling them to both mortgaged and cash buyers. They're selling them to remote buyers. But there doesn't seem to be the new stock, either new homes, newly built homes available, or second-hand homes coming to the market. So, is there some messaging that needs to happen to tell potential vendors or would-be vendors, actually, this is a good time to be bringing your property to the market?
I think there is a message there, and I think there is messaging that needs to be done. But I think a lot of the problem seems to be with people who are wanting to sell second-hand homes, that the chances of them moving into a new home is slim and less than what it should be, because the fact that, exactly as you say, that the construction of new homes has slowed down considerably because of the COVID. And not alone has it slowed down, but it also has prices have increased, and COVID has increased prices. And while they were probably at the top of the market, or at the top of the affordability of the market for a lot of people before COVID, now there's an added extra put on top of them because of the COVID. So that it is causing problems in the marketplace from that. But then again, the houses aren't available either. So that is further causing problems and further causing delays. And a lot of people, like, they sell their house, but they have nowhere to go if they do sell it, because they could either be trading up or trading to a new property, and that is a problem. So I suppose it is good. It's a good time for people to put the property in the market, because properties are selling exceptionally well. But at the same time, I think the supply and demand on the second-hand homes is a big problem. There's a lot more people there to buy them. A lot of the younger people that are looking at mortgages, it's more difficult for them to buy second-hand homes, but they're the closest property that they can buy to get into a home. They can't afford to buy a new 3-bedroom semi. If you look at any of the towns in Ireland, you're looking at probably the best part of between probably 230, 240, maybe even as far as 300,000 for a new 3-bedroom semi, maybe 1,150 square feet or 1,200 square feet. And that's a lot of money for young people who maybe aren't earning as much money as they would be able to get a mortgage in that property. So hence, second-hand homes are the ones, they're not near as expensive as that. And we've been asking the government over 2 terms now, 2 budgets, and we'll be asking them again in the next one, to give some of the first-time buyers grant to second-hand purchasers, second-hand properties for first-time purchasers, because again, it gives them a little bit of a help and it gives them a little bit of a leg up. And those type of properties are available in the marketplace at the moment, those first-time buyers homes in second-hand properties. But because of the mortgages the way they are, and they are difficult enough to get mortgages, even at the moment, it's difficult for them to get into buying a property, even at those levels.
Yeah, and Pat, I think that's a very fair assessment in terms of the supply situation, and I think it's definitely indicative of what we're seeing on the demand side. But I mean, if we drill down in terms of the demand, we know that there are people who at the start of the year were in a great position and might have been ready to buy a property, and then due to COVID-19, they may have been furloughed, or may have been in receipt of COVID payments, or through their employer. How is that kind of demand going to fare in terms of access to mortgages? Because at the moment we're seeing a pent up demand, and as I said, when I speak to estate agents, they're telling me that it's from both mortgaged and home buyers. But I spoke with a number of regional estate agents, and they've given me figures of between 60 and 70% of their purchases at the moment are cash purchases. Now, we can understand that that might account for some of the pent up demand, and so those people are sitting and ready and maybe weren't so impacted by the pandemic and the effects of that. But in terms of people who in January would have been in a good position to get a mortgage, and because their employment position has changed, may not be now. Are you seeing much of that, or that cohort of potential buyer being lost in the market?
Yeah, we're seeing some of it, but not a huge amount of it. As you say, and what has been happening in the marketplace is there are a lot more cash buyers back in the market. I think in the height of 2000 and probably 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and maybe even 13, at the height of that, there could have been 60% of purchases, people buying properties without a mortgage and no needing for a mortgage. And I think that went down to about maybe 25 to 30%, and it has gone down to that sort of figure. But it definitely is back up again. And I think when the figures are done on it for up to the end of June, we'll find that figure has probably risen to up to 40%. And that would be a huge figure again in the marketplace, because a lot of people in Ireland still have money to buy properties. A lot of people coming into Ireland from other countries have money to buy properties, and they're not dependent on mortgages to get them. Now, those cohort of people that you're speaking about, it's very difficult for them because of the fact that their wages have been affected, or their terms of employment has been affected because of COVID. I think if they're not secure in their job, the banks are looking at them that, well, okay, when you get a secure job, come back and speak to us. But other ones that haven't been affected, that they've only been affected because their employer has taken the COVID payments, those type of ones that have gone back to work, we have been saying to the banks, and I think the banks now are treating them slightly different. Mm-hmm. They're actually allowing them to buy properties, and they're allowing them to give them the mortgages once they're able to see that their terms of employment or their wages haven't been changed. And again, this is something that the banks, I think, took a sort of a view on this from everybody's point of view, that everybody was tarred with the same brush, and that is not the case. And banks have now, I think, been looking at it, as they say themselves, on a one-to-one basis, which is good from that point of view. And it gives those people that are going back to work now and they're earning the same amount of money as they were, and their wages haven't been affected, the opportunity to get a mortgage and to get on that property ladder.
Yeah, look, obviously we hope that there will be something a little more creative put in place in the upcoming budget that will actually reflect the position of people like that, particularly those who continue to be in rental situation where we're seeing actually continued rental increases over this period. So, now that we're judging figures against last year's, we can see that rental is slightly up again. So these are the positions these are the people who are put in a particularly difficult position. So obviously we're hoping that there will be some consideration there in budget 2021. And Pat, before we let you go, one final thing, as you were speaking about the launch of this IPAV report, which by the way makes for some really interesting reading. There's a great breakdown. So I would definitely recommend anybody who's interested in property anywhere in the country to take a look and get the price figures breakdown. It's a fantastic resource. But just one of the things you mentioned is that, in your opinion, there are 300,000 too few properties in the market. So that tallies with the report that was just issued earlier, just at the end of last week, by the Irish Home Builders Association. And, they're predicting or forecasting demand for 36,000 new homes every year for the next 20 years. So realistically, where do you think that supply is going to come from? 300,000 homes.
Well, I think it's at the moment, a lot of the problem is that people haven't, over the past number of years, that wanted to buy properties, haven't been able to buy properties. And I think that's putting pressure on the system. And those people that I'm speaking about are people who weren't able to get mortgages, that the property market had moved on a little bit further than where they were able to afford to get mortgages. And I'm speaking mostly about the country areas here. I'm not speaking about the city. So if you take an average wage in the country, you're talking about probably 45,000. And you're talking about getting 3.5 times that in a mortgage, which really gives you about 140 or 150,000. And you won't buy any sort of a property, a reasonable property for that type of money. So the government and the central bank really needs to look at the lower paid as to how they intend to get them into the property market. And the only way they can get them in is to increase that level from 3.5 to 4.5 times. And that will allow them to borrow more money. I'm aware of that. But at the end of the day, they're still paying less for the mortgage than they would for the rental that you were speaking about a couple of minutes ago, Carol, because those rental prices have gone up. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But I remember sitting on a program with somebody during the last recession, before it started in 2005 or 2006, and they said there was a need for 93,000 houses per year. And I think in 2006 and maybe 2005, maybe 2006, and maybe even in 2007, there were 90 or 93,000 houses built per year. And when we got into the recession the last time, we were told that there was 300,000 houses too many. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, we're looking at 300,000 houses too little. And I think that is where it is at the moment, because there is a huge demand for properties at the moment, and that our property prices are staying up. The new houses, obviously, the houses are going to have to come from new housing. There's no doubt about that. But the problem with the cost of the new housing and people that can afford to buy it. Because there's not much point in buying or building houses in a lot of the country areas, the ones that you're talking about, that you visited along the Atlantic Way. There's not much point in building new houses in those areas at 300,000 when nobody can afford to buy them. So something is going to have to happen on the pricing. Either the pricing, we're going to have to build smaller houses, but we're going to have to have the price of houses somewhere between 200, 250, 260,000 instead of 250 to maybe 320 or 30,000, because people just can't afford to buy them. So maybe builders are going to build a different type of house. Maybe they're looking at building more per acre or something like that if they build lower type of housing or smaller type of housings. But whatever is going to have to happen, that price is going to have to be in a position that people who are earning a normal wage can afford to buy them. And I think the House Builders Association and the CIF need to look at that very seriously. And planners, I think, in counties and throughout the country need to look at that, because if we're going to build houses, we need to build them that the ordinary man on the street can buy them or woman on the street can buy them. If we don't, I think we're going down the road of building houses that people won't be able to afford to buy, and we'll be sitting looking at them maybe there that no one can buy, or else that we won't have them at all, because builders won't buy them if they can't get people to buy them. They won't build them.
No, that's a very fair assessment, and it seems that time and time again, the affordability seems to be the nut we just can't crack here. So I don't even know. There is no such thing as a silver bullet for this. We know that, but I'm not sure if this current government actually have the willingness to really take on the suite of changes that would be needed to even try impact on affordability. But that feels like a larger conversation for another day. So we leave it there for now. My thanks again to Pat Davitt, CEO of IPAV. We need to take a quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
And welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in contact with the show on ipropertyradio.com. Also now we're joined by Karen Muldowney, Business Manager of Sharpoorji Pallonji Ireland and the UK, to talk about the construction sector as we're easing back into kind of a new season, as it were. Karen, obviously you've been on the show before talking about the launch of Sharpoorji Pallonji in Ireland. So you're very welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Carol. How are you? It's great to catch up. It's been far too long.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It has been a long 6-7 months. And, really what I'm interested in knowing, because Sharpoorji Pallonji was quite new, relatively new into the Irish market, as in within the last 2 years, how have your projects on the ground been impacted over the last number of months?
Well, we have 2 projects in Dublin at the moment. And I suppose, fortunately for us, both projects, the stages that they were at, we were very lucky. We tried to keep business as usual, give us an opportunity to tweak processes and procedures. Obviously, we had to shut down the sites during the lockdown, But as I said, unfortunately, the stages we were at and the forms and techniques of construction meant that we only required a few people on site. So we had Fox Rock. That form of construction is quite a new form of construction. It's ICF, which is insulated concrete formwork. And it's very similar to Lego. It fits together using kind of interlocking blocks of expanded polystyrene, and then it's like permanent shuttering where concrete is poured. So it lends itself for less craneage on site. Health and safety wise, the risks of personal injury are lower. There's less traffic on site, less personnel, which I suppose really we didn't know at the time, but it's certainly a noteworthy advantage while trying to social distance. There's less waste on site and less site noise. So it was a very lucky choice of construction that we chose, and lent itself well during this time.
Okay, that's an interesting one, because actually, we've covered different methods of modern construction and modular and offsite construction, but we haven't really discussed an ICF project before. So actually, that's a really interesting one. And, perhaps another day we might actually take you through some of the mechanics of that, for people who might be considering this type of construction but haven't maybe been exposed to it in a project. The project in Fox Rock, what's the nature of that project?
That is 8 4-story townhouses. So they're large townhouses. Each unit would have a lift in. They're beautiful 4-story townhouses now, built just across from the gables there in the village of Fox Rock.
Fantastic location.
Yeah, fabulous.
Okay, and actually, one of the other things that we've really been talking about is not just the impact of projects on the ground, but there's a couple of elements. There's one, contracts and bidding, that perhaps was won back in 2019. Those projects being stalled and still haven't kicked off, which is, having a huge impact on forecasting, not just financially, but in terms of project and resource forecasting for contractors. But I know from speaking to you that you've actually been involved in securing new business and getting new business over the line during this period, significant business in London. Are you in a position to talk to us about that?
Yeah. So we signed a new contract in London during lockdown, actually. It's a mixed development. It's 37 million in Barking in London. It's a design and build contract for 170 PRS units, along with commercial and retail space and a 2-screen cinema for a company in London called Lindhill Properties. So that was really exciting because it gave us the opportunity to utilize the likes of Zoom and Skype, whereas probably we would have been backing over on planes. And we're using actually the same architects that we have on Sandyford, our architects in London. They're a UK and Irish-based company. The SADA architects based in Dublin, Simon McCafferty and Cormac Cleary. So it's great that we have them on both projects.
Okay, and it's interesting. I know from speaking to you previously that a huge, you're working for a global construction giant, so a huge part of your role does involve traveling a lot, and particularly being business manager of Ireland and the UK. Typically, is this something that you would be traveling over and back on a weekly or a couple of times a week basis?
Oh, yeah. Realistically, had we not had COVID, I would have been going to London every week. We have a meeting on a Friday afternoon, which is now done through Teams, and we'd have a meeting now on a Monday morning with the client. And again, that's done through Teams. So realistically, I probably would have been flying in and out of London maybe on a Friday or a Monday. So I suppose it's good in the respect of, us lowering our carbon footprint, looking at where, changing the way that we do business, and I think ultimately saving costs. Now, listen, nothing is ever going to, beat that one on, face-to-face contact with people, which we do need to get back to.
Of course.
But I think it is making us reflect a little bit that possibly we are maybe jumping on planes, a little bit too often, that we're where we don't need to.
Has there been an element, though, that construction is such a tangible project, and for project updates and for site updates, there has always been kind of a almost a tradition of walking the site with project teams at quite regular intervals. You know, I mean, obviously we've seen technology, whether it's virtual reality walkthroughs or 360 video, you know, we've seen huge progress being made to eliminate that. And we know that, you know, actually most design meetings and things like that now are not happening on site to minimize visitors to site, you know, which is a good thing. But you know, there's a culture change that needs to go hand in hand with that. You know, do you feel that's maybe happening over the last number of months, or do you think as soon as it's safe and I suppose as soon as it's safe and legal to do so, are we going to be straight back to jumping on planes and out walking sites?
No, I don't think so, because we would have always utilised our back office in Dubai for a lot of, you know, a lot of our work anyways. So I think what I've probably done is more just myself personally, is I'm not jumping on the plane as quickly as I would have. But we've always had that support and used the likes of Microsoft Teams with our teams in Dubai. So I think it's probably just us more locally.
Do you think you have the advantage there that you're working with one of the world's largest construction companies? You know, did that have some inherent benefits? Maybe that when COVID struck, were you able to tap into international knowledge, you know, technology resources? You know, you've worked for a long time in the Irish industry. You know, were you able to compare what was available to you at that time?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think as well, where, you know, we look at, say, how we coped in a recession, the last recession, I suppose one of the things that we did, we just kind of got on and we reacted, and we, you know, we tried to overcome every problem that we have, and don't see it as a problem, more just look for the solution. And I think I'm lucky to be surrounded by like-minded people like that, the likes of Rob, who would be our country manager, our senior project manager, Colin, who just worked tirelessly just to keep business as usual, and just, you know, looking at the advice and the guidelines and just adapting to it. So I was very lucky to be surrounded by those kind of
resilience is a real hallmark of this industry, whether it's in Ireland or globally, you know, because it has had to be, you know, survival is kind of in the DNA there. But again, I mentioned that Sharpoorji Pallonji is not long in Ireland. So when did the brand enter the Irish market officially?
Well, we set the company up back in August 2018, and during that time we were putting together the strategy of the business, and we looked, you know, at different, you know, were we going to do it through an acquisition, were we going to do it through organic growth, and I suppose really we have, you know, taken that decision to grow organically. We've the project in Foxrock, which, you know, is 5 million. We've now in Sandyford on 65 units there. That's for Respond Housing. That's 65 apartments in Sandyford. That's a design and build. And then we've got London, which is 37 million. So, you know, we're slowly creeping up to the project values that Sharpoorji Pallonji would be working on.
There's nothing slow about that jump from, you know, 5 million, 8.5 million, 12 million, 37 million.
Yeah,
you know, that's massive growth in less than a 2-year period, effectively.
Yeah, and I suppose that's you know, we can back that up with the experience that we have internationally, the capabilities, the working capital that we can bring to projects. So we're very fortunate like that we can just get on to the next project. But for us, I suppose for me, it's about delivering these projects in order to build a strong brand, because really we could, you know, we probably could go out now in the morning and pick up a number of projects. But I suppose really the important thing is in delivering these and letting these be our hallmark projects that we can point to people to say that they're done and they're completed.
Yeah, and look, that's a really important one for the industry that we're in. You know, and we have to leave it there for now. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. I would definitely like to return and maybe have a discussion about the project and the ICF, because it's something that we haven't discussed here on the show before. And I know it's in the context of looking at alternative and modern methods of construction. It's really important actually to be able to point to a project and and evaluated as it goes through the course. So actually we might touch base with you again if you're willing and have a conversation about that.
Look, if anybody wants to reach out to me through LinkedIn or look up Alltherm ICF on the internet, I'd say they'd only be delighted to meet with people and discuss it. But I certainly would highly recommend it as a modern form, a faster form of construction.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. That was Karen Muldowney,
Thank you so much.
Business Manager of Sharpoorji Pallonji in Ireland and the UK. We need to take another quick break. Stay tuned.
93.9 Dublin South FM.
Welcome back to Property Matters on Dublin South FM with myself, Carol Tallon. I'm now joined remotely by Paul Walsh, General Manager of CIM Europe. Paul, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Karen.
So I mentioned there you're General Manager of CIM Europe. CIM actually stands, remind me again, what does it stand for?
It stands for Continuous Intelligent Monitoring.
Perfect. And while you're General Manager in Europe, this is an Australian startup and Australian-based company founded by an Irish man who happens to be your brother. So you might just give us a bit of background about CIM.
Sure, yeah. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on your show. CIM was set up in 2014 by my brother David. He originally went to Australia in 2009 after the global financial crisis. He had a small construction company that was severely impacted by the financial crisis. So he decided to relocate. Mm-hmm. And at the time he went to Australia, he started working for a company that did electrical metering on large energy consuming buildings. And I suppose what he realized, according as he began to work for this company, was that a lot of the large building owners and operators were using this electrical metering data to try and operate how the building ran. And it was difficult to do so because when equipment started to perform poorly, it would appear as a spike on a report, and then retrospectively the company would try and diagnose what happened. And it was the analogy that David used, and it works quite well, is it's a bit like trying to drive your car and using your rear view mirror to do so. You can only find out what's happened or try and diagnose what has happened in retrospect, and it's never a good way. So he felt there was always a better mousetrap out there. So David started CIM. And one of the things that CIM does is it ingests multiple data sources from a building to try and optimize plant and equipment. And the sources of data we use are primarily the building management system. And we take granular data from that in real time and begin to diagnose problems before they actually occur.
Okay. This is something that we've covered on the show quite a bit. And, we're seeing a huge move and a shift from data being seen almost as a liability to something that's actually now harnessed as a threat, as an opportunity in a way that it wasn't before, which is important, and it's a good thing for us. But you talk there about a lot of the data is coming in from building management systems, and yet we know that even in newly built and contemporary buildings, particularly here in Ireland, and I don't know what the situation is in Sydney where David is based, we're seeing new buildings being fitted with 15-year-old BMS systems. So how is that working in terms of your technology? Do you work on a retrofit basis?
So our technology works with any type of building management system. We do see a lot of what you touched on there, Carl, around BMSs being poorly commissioned or being incorrectly specified for a particular building. And a lot of what CIM does is, because we're independent, we're able to work with our clients to ensure that the BMS is correctly specified day one, and then it's correctly commissioned. So a lot of times you have a flawed model in that you have the BMS vendors commissioning their own systems, and it's a bit like checking your own homework. You're never going to do it correctly. Yeah. And it works right across. Like CIM, while it's Australian founded, we have a large presence in Europe now. We work with several of the large multinationals, because this issue of data being like in silos and difficult to access is not just in the building or in the commercial office space. It's right across the large energy users, so large manufacturing sites, large libraries, museums, any of those large entities do suffer with this data being difficult to access, and we call it dark data. But did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because again, it seems to be a case that there's a growing awareness of the importance of this. There's growing awareness that actually, I think actually in the most recent Proptech report coming out of Oxford, Professor Andrew Baum calls data and data analytics the grimy plumbing of PropTech and of real estate. And I think that's that's quite a good analogy. It is the grimy plumbing. However, he also highlights it and identifies it as one of the key areas of opportunity, and where there's the potential for a real competitive edge as well in terms of delivering high quality buildings that are more sustainable and more efficient to run, but also optimize comfort while optimizing productivity and efficiencies. And these are all things that sound good in theory, but I wonder how much of that is being lost in translation. So, for example, are you, your main business across Europe, is that going into newly built buildings or is it going into the retrofit?
Oh, sorry. So yeah, we primarily work with existing buildings, and I suppose our value proposition to a building owner is that we say to them, listen, by using your data more intelligently, we can optimize your existing plant and equipment, and that ticks a lot of boxes in their heads because they don't need to invest additional capital. It's not resource intensive. CIM have a technical engineering support team that deliver the results. So it gives them that immediate cost savings. And in the current climate, that's super relevant. And then around the safe returning to work with COVID, a lot of buildings now will be bringing in more fresh air, which will result in energy increases because you got to cool or heat that air. You can't recirculate the air. So it's especially relevant now, and it's a very very good value prop for the large commercial office owners.
Yeah, and again, we will come back to the utility savings, which is a huge thing from a sustainability point of view and from a financial cost management point of view. But actually, you've touched on something really important there, and I'm not sure that conversation is happening enough. We're coming into cooler weather. We're coming into the winter season while trying to, building operators and employers are trying to make their building premises as safe as possible so that their employees feel confident returning to the office or to the workplace, even if it's on a phased basis or even if it's kind of 2 or 3 days a week. So there is this huge agenda to not only make buildings safer and the air that's circulating within buildings safer, but also to be able to show that it's safer.
Yes.
But what is the likely impact of this in terms of, utilities and sustainability? Because we know that the energy consumption is likely to be significantly higher. Do we know how HVAC systems are going to have to work in the context of COVID?
So you're right. Around coming back to work, it's all about building trust of the employees or the people returning to work. So being able to use building data, like some of the buildings we work with have CO2 sensors internally, and you can tell when the CO2 levels are increasing that you need to show how you're flushing out that stale air and bringing in fresh air. But to answer your question, there will definitely be an energy increase because you're bringing in more that outside air that you've got to heat up primarily in Ireland and the UK. So to trying to quantify that will be difficult. It depends how harsh the winter is, if I'm honest. But what we find is even the logistics of doing that, sometimes we find equipment that, outside air dampers mightn't be correctly working. So even doing what the company wants to do or the building owner wants to do is often difficult. But by getting that granular data, you can diagnose really, really quickly if there is an issue. And again, you can use dashboards to communicate that to your staff and to your employees or your tenants, and they get that trust built up that the building owner or the building manager is really on top of this.
Yeah, and Paul, in terms of what's been happening over the last number of months for your existing clients and the buildings that you were working with prior to February of this year, what changes have been required over the past 6 to 7 months?
So a lot of the clients we work with now are in that process of either putting in CO2 monitoring and then ensuring that that is correctly maintained to comply with COVID guidelines. I do see that the conversation has shifted slightly, Carol, from OPEX savings and driving efficiencies in the plant to more we've got to make sure this is a safe environment for our employees to return to work. So the dynamic has changed, but I suppose the emphasis on ensuring existing plant and equipment hasn't.
Okay.
But I do see, as I say, a constraint in the availability of capital. So clients that would have had access to capital to upgrade plants and equipment, chillers, boilers, air handlers, now are looking at ways of optimizing existing plant and equipment rather than having to deploy any capital. And that's just, I suppose, a feature of the overall financial environment as opposed to something that's COVID specific.
Yeah, and look, and that's a fair assessment. In terms of, I suppose, if we were to look ahead a little bit, where do you see, or where is CIM planning for, in terms of, I suppose, the expansion of IoT? How is that likely to impact on the HVAC and the running of a commercial building? I mean, where do you see this, kind of in 2, 3, 4 years' time? Where are we heading?
So the more data sources that come into a building, the better a data analytics platform should be performing. Because I suppose what a good data analytics platform will do is integrate multiple data sources, normalize that data, cleanse that data, and then use that data set to identify when the building is running well or when it's not running well. And the additional sensors that you're referring to on the IoT side of it will just feed into that data, so that data lake, and it will allow us to run the software across those to identify opportunities to optimize the asset. So I do see that data in the current climate. I do see data analytics as being the only lifeboat for some of these large building owners, because you've increasing operational costs. Energy costs is going up the whole time. You're going to have additional energy costs now with the COVID guidelines. You're going to have reduced access to capital. So optimizing your existing assets using the data that they're creating in our heads is one of the only opportunities to survive this the COVID crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's a huge element of future-proofing here. And in fact, only in the last week or two, I was speaking to the sustainability manager of one of Ireland's largest REITs. And, he spoke about how important this is, even from satisfying investors.
Yes, ESG. That ESG and CSR, we see it the whole time. It's becoming increasingly more prevalent in the discussions we're having. A lot of times the investors are driving the CO2 reduction agenda, which is perfect. And again, the data analytics platform ties in lovely with that, because it delivers that demand side reduction without having to invest in, on-site generation or procuring green energy or doing the power purchase agreements, or, it does tick that box as well.
Yeah, I think what we've seen across in terms of Proptech and all technology for the built environment, one of the things we've seen is this huge acceleration of trends that perhaps were already in play, but this huge acceleration of trends. And we've heard the description that more has been achieved in 3 months, than had been achieved in 3 years prior to this. And I suppose that raises the question, as people return to the workplace in whatever guise it's going to be, whether it's part-time or half of the week or whatever that's likely to be, by spring next year, we should certainly have a better indication of, how important, how do you see the data is likely to change in the next, if we were looking at this in 6 months' time?
So you really want to ensure that, I suppose, as people return to work, that your energy consumption reflects that. So in other words, there needs to be a correlation between the number of people on site and how much plant and equipment is running. So I do see that, having, just having one temperature set point for entire floor or entire building will change, because it'll need to be a smarter building. And I think the data that is there will enable that to happen. We just got to maybe change some control strategies and optimize the existing setup without having to spend any additional money on upgrading your existing plant and equipment. But I do see that that's going to be a key parameter for building owners to be able to keep the asset profitable, right? Because that's the ultimate goal in the next 6 months. How do you keep the doors open with 50% of the people in there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Paul, do you know what? I'm so sorry. Today we didn't even get time to kind of go on to some of the more necessary components here in terms of predictive maintenance and indeed prescriptive maintenance. Yeah. But what we might do is we might touch base again in spring next year when we see how the return to the workplaces has gone. And I think that the story, it will be very telling to see how buildings are performing and how they've been able to perform and support the return to the workplace. So, if you're willing, certainly we'd love to chat to you again in spring next year and to see how all of that journey went. In the meantime, we need to finish up today. My thanks again to Paul Walsh, General Manager of CIM Europe. Thank you, Paul, for joining us today.
Thank you, Karen.
That's it from us today. Thank you for listening into Property Matters on Dublin South FM. You can get in touch with the show on Twitter at iPropertyRadio or by emailing hello@iPropertyRadio.com. As always, my thanks to Peter Rice on sound and show producer Katie Talon of Hear Me Roar Media. We're back at the same time next week. From myself, Carol Talon, and all the team here, stay safe.